on the bank of the Kaskaskia River in southern Illinois, a state biologist named Randy Sauer reaches into a tank, lifts out a writhing, armored fish, and lowers it into the water. It's young, only a foot or so long, but it already looks like something built before the dinosaurs. A long, bony snout lined with rows of needle teeth, a body plated in scales as hard as enamel. Given enough years, this fish could grow longer than a horse and heavier than a refrigerator. And Randy Sauer is releasing it on purpose, by the truckload, into a river that the state of Illinois once spent decades trying to wipe it out of completely. This is not conservation for its own sake. This is an act of war. Because a few hundred miles downstream, an enemy has taken over the rivers of America's heartland. A fish you have almost certainly seen, even if you never knew its name. The one that explodes out of the water by the thousands and slams into passing boats. America has spent billions of dollars trying to stop it, building one of the most expensive fish barriers ever constructed. And it still might not be enough. So now, as a kind of desperate last resort, the government is bringing back a monster it once tried to erase, and hoping it remembers how to hunt. To understand how it came to this, you have to start with the fish that learned to fly. In the 1970s, fish farmers across the American South had a problem. Their ponds were choking with algae and weeds, and they needed something to clean them out. So they imported a solution from Asia. Several species of large carp, including the silver carp and the bighead carp, prized for their ability to filter enormous amounts of plankton out of the water. For a while, it worked. And then the rivers flooded. The carp escaped their ponds, slipped into the Mississippi, and discovered an entire continent with no idea what had just arrived. They spread with astonishing speed, up the river and into its tributaries, eventually reaching 31 states. And the silver carp brought a party trick that turned them into internet legends. When a boat motor passes overhead, they panic, and they launch, hurling their 10 to 50-pound bodies as much as 10 feet into the air. People have been knocked clean off jet skis. Boaters have had bones broken and teeth knocked out by a wall of flying fish. It would almost be funny if it weren't a sign of something catastrophic happening beneath the surface. Because these carp are filter feeders, and they devour the plankton that sits at the very base of the food chain, the food that every native fish ultimately depends on. In stretch after stretch of river, they have simply taken over, becoming the most abundant fish in the water, while native sport fish have crashed by around 30%. And they are now knocking on the door of the greatest freshwater system on Earth. That door is a canal in Chicago. Back in 1900, engineers carved the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal to reverse the flow of the Chicago River. And in doing so, they accidentally connected two worlds that nature had kept apart, the Mississippi River Basin and the Great Lakes. Today, that canal is the single year-round water route between the carp-infested rivers of the Midwest and Lake Michigan. And on the other side of it lies a fishing and boating economy worth around $20 billion a year. If the carp get in, scientists fear they could do to the Great Lakes exactly what they did to the Illinois River: strip the food web bare and collapse the native fishery. So America decided to build a wall. First came electric barriers, sunk into the canal starting in 2002 and expanded in 2010, designed to shock approaching fish and turn them back. But that was only the beginning. At a choke point called the Brandon Road Lock and Dam near Joliet, Illinois, the Army Corps of Engineers is now building one of the most elaborate fish barriers ever attempted, at a cost of more than $1 billion. It stacks weapon upon weapon into a single 110-foot channel, an electric barrier, underwater speakers blasting noise, a curtain of bubbles, and a special lock built to flush fish back downstream. The Corps have mapped out 18 possible ways the carp could slip into the Great Lakes, and sealed off every single one of them but this. And still, the fish keep testing the line. In August of 2022, a fisherman pulled a lone silver carp out of the water just 7 miles from Lake Michigan, on the wrong side of the defenses. Crews scrambled boats to hunt for more, found none, and exhaled. But the message was clear. After billions of dollars and more than 30 years of effort, the carp are still winning the river. They are too numerous, too established, breeding by the literal ton to ever be removed. So a handful of biologists started asking a very different question. Instead of building a wall to keep the carp out, what if we brought back the one native predator big enough to eat them? That predator is the alligator gar. And it is a genuine living fossil, a fish whose kind has prowled North American waters for more than 100 million years, since the age of the dinosaurs. It can reach 8 feet long and 300 pounds, the second largest freshwater fish on the entire continent, wrapped in armor so tough that almost nothing can eat a full-grown one. It is, in every sense, an apex predator, built to hunt big fish in big rivers. And here is the part that should make your jaw drop. We deliberately wiped it out. For most of the 20th century, fisheries agencies and anglers looked at the alligator gar and saw a monster, a so-called trash fish that they were convinced was devouring the bass and other sport fish people wanted to catch. So they set out to destroy it. They shot them. They netted them. Some states placed actual bounties on their heads. And at the same time, the dams and levees we threw across the rivers cut the gear off from the flooded backwaters where they breed. Between the killing and the lost habitat, the alligator gar vanished from the entire northern half of its range, wiped out of Illinois, Iowa, Ohio, and beyond. As one Illinois biologist put it, bringing it back now is a lot like putting wolves back into Yellowstone after the ranchers had shot them all. Because that is exactly what's happening. The same kind of agencies that once exterminated this fish are now raising it by the thousands in hatcheries and trucking it back into the rivers in Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee. In 2016, lawmakers in Illinois were so eager that the legislature unanimously passed a resolution begging the state to speed the gar's return, calling it the only native fish capable of eating an adult Asian carp. The free solution we spent decades destroying, suddenly being rebuilt at taxpayer expense and pointed straight at the invader. It sounds like the perfect ending, but here is where the story gets honest, because the very people doing this work will be the first to tell you that the gar is probably not going to save us. When you actually ask the biologists running these programs, the picture turns a lot more sober. The chief of fisheries for Illinois has said flatly that the gar stockings were never really about Asian carp at all. The real goal, he explained, was to restore a native apex predator we'd driven to local extinction, and to give anglers a giant trophy fish to chase. The idea that gar will come riding in to rescue the rivers, he warned, is misleading, and the numbers show why. In one stretch of the Illinois reintroduction, the state released 6,000 young alligator gar over several years. Of those, only about 1,500 grew large enough to survive at all. 1,500 fish against an Asian carp population measured not in numbers but in tons per river mile. It is, in the words of one expert, a drop in the bucket. And there's a deeper problem, rooted in the gar's own body. Even a huge alligator gar can only swallow prey up to a certain size, which means a carp is only truly vulnerable to a gar for the first few months of its life. After that, it grows too big for even a monster to eat. On top of that, gar are painfully slow to rebuild. They take many years to mature. They need those vanished, flooded backwaters to spawn. and a giant breeding female is precisely the kind of trophy a fisherman struggles to throw back, sometimes killed before she ever gets the chance to reproduce. So the math is brutally simple. The alligator gar on its own will never out-eat the Asian carp. It cannot be the silver bullet, no matter how badly we want it to be. Which is why, in the long run, the people fighting this invasion say our best hope may be even stranger, convincing Americans to eat the carp themselves, fork by fork, faster than the fish can breed. All of which leaves this story in a deeply humbling place. We took a fish that had quietly done this exact job, holding the balance of these rivers for 100 million years. We decided it was a pest, and we erased it. Then, when an invader poured in and seized the water, we spent more than $1 billion on an electric, bubbling, blaring wall to do a fraction of what a healthy population of native predators once did for nothing. And now, almost too late, we are scrambling to undo our own mistake, knowing the gar can only ever be one small piece of a fight we may have already lost. But there is one last detail in all of this, and it might be the most telling of all. The alligator gar has a smaller cousin, the long-nosed gar, a native predator we never quite managed to wipe out. And in the very rivers where the carp have taken over and the native fish have collapsed, the long-nosed gar has been quietly increasing, feeding on the young carp, one of the only native species actually thriving in the chaos. Nature, it turns out, held on to one of its weapons against this invasion. We just spent the last century throwing the other one away. So here's the question this whole story leaves behind, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. Should America keep pouring billions of dollars into walls and barriers and electric fences, trying to hold a line the carp keep finding ways around? Or should we put that effort into rebuilding the predators we destroyed, the gaur and everything like it, and accept that nature's own cleanup crew works slowly and might not arrive in time? There's no easy answer here, and reasonable people land on very different sides of it. That's exactly why I want to know where you stand. And if stories like this one, where the villain is a fish that flies and the hero is one we nearly wiped out ourselves, are the kind of thing you're here for, then subscribe and stick around. There are far more of them than you would ever guess.